Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez, and today we are with special guest Kelly E. Wallace. Kelly, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me on the show.
It's an honor to have you on the show. And just a heads up for those who are listening, we're going to be talking about some things that may be triggering or hard to listen to, but just wanted to give that note before we get started. So thank you for being here today, first of all.
Oh, yes, you're welcome. Yeah, it's a nice Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. This interview, we're going to be diving into your work as a champion, as a survivor, a thriving survivor. How did you start, first of all, getting involved in transitioning from survivor to thriving survivor?
That's a great question. I became a surviving thriver to a champion through many years of therapy, and I had a lot of support in that respect. I also came from a family where I was raised by a single mom, and my mom, she believed that I had been a victim of child sexual abuse, and she believed my story. And part of the success that I believe that I have is because I have a parent that really strongly believed me and advocated for me. There have been a lot of research studies that show that if you have at least one parent or family member who believes you, your your chances of having more success in life, being quote unquote high functioning, are much greater than those who are unfortunately not believed. And I think unfortunately many people who are victims of incest in our society are not believed just because we have a system that has been set up to not really even believe survivors, just to kind of like sweep it under the rug. And so through my own recovery, speaking out and sharing my story, I think that has really made me what I would call a champion of helping others and being an advocate for people who have been sexually abused.
How does this happen, and how can it be prevented?
It is, I believe that this happens in silence. So when there is silence within families, I'm a victim of incest. I'm not a victim of, like a coach, a priest, Catholic religious abuse. But, for me, my own experience was that my family, I believe that it had been going on for generations. I believe that the person that victimized me was victimized himself. So I was sexually abused by my paternal grandfather, and uh, he was a victim who didn't get the help and resources that he needed. He was a product of the Great Depression, where he was raised in Eastern Oregon, and his mother effectively abandoned him. And he was raised by cowboys. And so he was probably subjected to that sexual abuse when he was being raised by these cowboys and handed off. And, that culture is just, it's just everywhere. Incest is a topic that no one wants to talk about. Um, and this, again, with it happening in silence, where my grandfather was very, very patriarchal and very sexist. There was just a lot of, very old school. Not that that's um, not that old school is bad, but when you have like a very patriarchal environment that you're raising children in. It really creates a an epidemic of silence. And so when it was happening to me, no one no one explained, like I didn't have language for what was going on. I didn't realize that what was happening to me was not normal. I thought it was what happened to little girls between their grandfather and their granddaughters. And it wasn't until I saw a child sexual awareness video in my second grade classroom that I realized what was happening to me was not normal. And this was also in the mid 80s. So if you think about, the mid 80s, it was just a completely different time. I was 7 years old. Um, at that time, people were just really starting to kind of talk about domestic violence. The reporting rates for sexual abuse were really, really low because we didn't talk about it. No one talked about it. And so if you allow secrets to happen in the dark, they stay there. And so the ways to prevent it are to have conversations with your children, um, at the dinner table, after school, that constant vigilance of like checking in with, your kids, your nieces, your nephews, about their interactions with adults, and um, using language, like usually using appropriate language to describe genitalia, vagina, penis, like when we're talking and using those words, it's important to be able to, for kids to identify, their private parts. And so when you have openness, when you have lightness, it doesn't allow that to happen in the dark. There's so many children's books too, um, that talk about this, and so about the subject. And so finding a good book that describes this this topic is important, and it's important to um, bring into the home or at school, wherever, I think that it's just talking, it's just conversations, no
And
secrets.
yeah, so you said it was in the second grade when you saw a video
Mhm,
at school, correct?
mhm. Yeah.
Uh, how was that conversation like with your mom or family?
Well, the interesting thing is, so I saw this video in my second grade classroom. It was um, right after Thanksgiving. I had just come back from um, a visit with my dad. So my parents had divorced when I was 6. And so my dad was living with my grandparents, his parents. And my mom had moved us very far away. So we were living in the western side of Oregon, and my dad was living on the eastern side of Oregon. And so I just come off of this visit where I had been sexually abused by my grandfather, and I saw this video in my second grade classroom, and I've gone back to try and find out what that video was called. I've just given it a generic title of Good Touch, Bad Touch because that was kind of like the language that was used back then. And I waited. I didn't really, I don't know what, I don't have any idea why I waited, but I waited a couple weeks. And it was a Saturday morning on in December, and I was watching Saturday morning cartoons. I had just eaten a bowl of cereal. I was sitting on our coffee table, and suddenly I just was like, oh, I should probably go tell mom about this video I saw, and what had happened. And so when I walked into the kitchen, my mom was like making breakfast or something. When I walked into the kitchen, my mom was like, "Oh, oh." And so I remember telling her this, what happened. And she was like, okay, go back into the living room and, keep watching cartoons. I need to make some phone calls. So my mom called the police and she called some friends. And that moment, she really just like sprang into action. And that moment kind of changed my life. That Saturday morning, I had no idea it was going to completely change the rest of my life forever. Um, so that was a bit of what happened to me.
Where did your mom get this, I guess, this trust or this courage to have that openness to believe you? Because that's something that I think other parents out there, maybe they can learn from this.
Yeah. It's really interesting because and I didn't learn this until 10 or 15 years ago, but my mom grew up in Maine and New Hampshire, and her grandmother, my great grandmother, um, found out that my grandma was being molested by someone, by another family member. And my great grandmother, Emma, told that kid, that family member, to stop, to knock it off, to stop molesting my grandmother. And that message, and I believe it stopped, but again, it goes down in families. I believe it is a family, it's in systems, family systems. So I think that modeling of having a strong mother figure like person telling her, that's not okay. That is not, no, that doesn't happen. And that was, that would have been in the 1930s. So you can kind of see the differences between like my grandfather being raised by cowboys and then my great grandmother telling
Hmm.
a family member to knock it off. So there was that which I've always just found so interesting. And my I have some cousins that live um in Atlanta, and they're actually second cousins, but they told me that story too. So it's within the family. It's known. It's like it's known within the family that she did that. And so that awareness, I think, is where my mom got that. But with my own mom, she didn't know what was happening to me. My mom had noticed in the years between like 4.5 and 7 that I was extremely anxious and that I was very shut down at times. I was so quiet, and she didn't understand like why that was. And a lot of kids have anxiety, um, but she just knew that there was like something off. And so after I told her what happened, my mom is a researcher, like she loves the library. So she like went to the library and started doing a bunch of research into this topic. And suddenly it was like, oh, this is why Kelly is the way that she is, because she's been a victim of incest. And so all of these behaviors just explained why I was the way that I was. So yeah, that's kind of how my mom was able to, um, kind of fight for me and be like a champion for me.
For you, what was the vocabulary that you had regarding yourself at this time of your life? Like, let's say your teenage years,
Hmm.
young womanhood.
Hmm. I think I started identifying more as a survivor as an early teenager because I think there were more there were conversations going on about being incest survivor, being a survivor of sexual abuse. There were more conversations going on then. Still not a lot. I mean, it was just a very, very different time. And you think about sexual harassment in the workplace was written into law in 1994. So like um, there still wasn't a whole lot of conversations about sexual abuse. Um, but it was when I think of the word victim, I think of my 7-year old, 8-year old self who has just come out of this experience. And I didn't have I had some resources, but I didn't I wasn't running around saying, "Hey, I'm a victim," or "Hey, I'm a survivor." I didn't, because I was too little. I was more, interested in running around trying to find, you know, chocolate cake, or I don't know, like kid things. I
Yeah.
wasn't but when I was a teenager, that language. And I think I started, going to the library became like a thing. I grew up in a town that didn't have a whole lot of when I was a teenager. I grew up in a town that it was just really boring. There's just not a lot to do. So I go to the library because I could walk there and read magazines. Growing up as a a kid with a single parent, there wasn't a lot of money, and so the library offered resources. So I remember um, finding books at the library about sexual abuse and the recovery of it. I don't think I read them, but I was just like aware of the titles. And I think my mom had some books. There was a book that kind of came out in the late 80s called The Courage to Heal. And it was one of
Mm.
the first workbooks or one of the first books that became like a kind of an overnight quiet success. Um, and it was written by two women. One was an incest survivor, and the other one was a writer. And that I remember that book being in our home, but I never read it. And so um, the language for being a survivor, I think probably would have hit about that time as well. So
Is there ever a moment during this time of your life where you would tell yourself, Kelly, one day you're going to be an advocate. One day you're going to help bring prevention to this. Did that ever cross your mind?
no, no. I you know I knew that I felt comfortable sharing my story because I had a lot of friends that I told the story of what happened to me to. And, because I had been telling the story, one thing that we didn't touch on, I'll just talk about briefly is, um, after the police were called, there was an investigation. There was enough evidence to charge my grandfather, and so it actually went to a trial. And I was interviewed by police detectives. I was put into early childhood intervention therapy, and I had to tell my story to complete strangers like over and over and over. So I got really used to telling my story. And, and just kind of like, this is what happened to me. And I didn't really think, like, I didn't really have a judgment to it. I just thought this is what happened to me and people should know about it. This is a really important part of my being. And so, when I was in my early 30s, um, I had a friend that said, you know, your story is so compelling that, I've not read a story like yours before. I've heard of people being sexually abused and it being swept under the rug, but I've never heard a story where an 8-year-old had to go and testify in court against their perpetrator. He was like, that is something that, that's a story that needs to be out in the world. And so when I heard that, I was like, yeah, maybe, I don't know. But then a couple years later, I was like, yeah, I think it does. And so I started um, writing my story down and sharing it with other people. And I found that I really had a strong knack for um, going on podcasts like this and just sharing my story and getting it out into the world. And so I think, I don't know if I really believe in this whole idea of like you were sent to this planet for one job. I don't I don't know if that's true or not, but I kind of do because I think there's a reason that I was supposed to go through this horrific experience to help other, and I think I was sent here to really help other people and be a voice for them. As uncomfortable as it is at times, I think by sharing my story and coming onto podcasts like this and talking about it, it really allows other people to like um, feel comfortable sharing their own stories.
So you've shared about the power of, speaking, and you've shared your story in front of
Mhm.
strangers. Were there any other, let's say, maybe tools or maybe even books or resources that you use that you could say may have helped in the healing process or journey or however you want to describe it?
Oh, what a great question. I haven't read the book that I was referencing earlier, The Courage to Heal. I bought that book many years ago on like thrift books or something like that. And I was like,
Mm.
I'm going to read that book. I haven't cracked that book yet. And I think part of it is that I know so much about the topic already that I haven't spent a lot of time kind of reading like self-help books about it, but I've gone to, there's a lot of information on the internet. There's a lot of RAIN, which is I should know the acronym. It's RAINN.org. It's the largest sexual assault advocacy group in the United States. They have a hotline and they have a great website that has resources to information and statistics. And you know, I've gone to that website and it's been really helpful for me. There's also a researcher. I think he's a little bit controversial now. I think a little bit of his research has been um, kind of challenged. Um, but he is, I don't know if he's at Northeastern University in Boston. But his name is Dr. David Lisak. And he is a sexual abuse survivor and himself and with a PhD, and he researches um, rape and sexual assault in our culture. And many years ago, I went down to Southern Oregon, Ashland, Oregon, and there was a conference being put on um, for the Ashland, Oregon Police Department about, the research into sexual abuse and reporting because, just the reporting of sexual abuse is a whole other like can of worms. There's been a lot of research into like effective reporting techniques. Anyway, so Dr. Lisak, when I was in this conference, I was in this conference room full of police officers, and I was like, and just kind of, it was a little scary, just all these guns everywhere, which I'm not a big fan of guns. But anyway, he said something that was really thought provoking for me. And he said, if you are a victim of child sexual abuse and or any sexual assault period, and you go to court, the prosecution rates are 1.5% to 3%. And I was like, wait, what? That was the first time that I'd ever heard that statistic. I was like, 1.5% to 3%. I made him repeat it. I was like, can you repeat that again? And he did. And I couldn't believe it because, with going to court, my grandfather was acquitted. And I, for so long, had believed that his acquittal was my fault. Um, but when I heard him say the statistic, I was like, oh my gosh. I was the deck was just completely stacked against me as a victim in that case. And so so those are a couple resources that have been helpful for me in terms of my own healing and recovery.
What did you do that empowered you to make that transition now to becoming a thriving survivor? And what
Mhm.
does that mean to you?
Well, first, the first thing that I think that was so imperative for me was um, 3 weeks after I reported, I was put into individual and group counseling with other little girls who had been sexually abused as well by family members. And so I believe that that early intervention, access to services, saved my life. And because there were, um, yeah, there were resources and help. And statistically, I talked about, if you have a parent that believes you, if you have access to healing resources, your chances are so much better. So I had, I'd done therapy. I think I did therapy for about a year and a half. And then I exited. And throughout my teenage years, I went to therapy. I had a couple different therapists in high school. I did a tiny bit in college, but not a ton. And then when I was in my late 20s, I believe, yeah, late 20s, I really started going to therapy as an adult. And that I think, because there really is a difference between getting services as a child and then as an adult, because what as a survivor and as an adult, you're really left with just kind of like a puddle of anxiety. And that's how the therapist that I started working with, her name is Abby, that's how she described her work with adult survivors of sexual assault. Um, and that was me. That was, um, I was someone that um, I had this um, way of being that I didn't realize I was running at the speed of sound. Like I walked fast, I spoke fast, I wasn't in my body. And so I think that, you know, when I started getting therapy as an adult, that was really the first time when I could actually real, you know, understand the mind body connection of how that trauma had really affected me as an adult. So, um, Abby described my particular anxiety as like a hand on my back that's constantly pushing me to just go, go, go. And it's like sometimes I don't even have an off switch because I'm just like like zinging around, like doing all kinds of things. And so, going to therapy for a long time was really important. And then during the pandemic, I started working with a woman on Zoom who had been um, a victim of, oh gosh, she was a victim of a crime. I can't recall the particular crime, but she was a chaplain and she worked with trauma survivors on meditation practices. And I really got um, so much. She really helped me be in my body. She really helped me understand where I carry my anxiety in my body. She had me really hone in, and so I carry anxiety around my eyes. I'm not anxiety. I carry the most tension around my eyes and in my stomach. And I was so busy zooming around that I didn't I never connected it, you know? So I worked with her for many years um, during the pandemic and accessing that and getting some tools to really get resourced and help myself kind of calm down,
Mm.
Um, that has been really helpful for me because I think it's just so super common for survivors not to be in their body. Um, Disassociated is a term that has come across in a lot of people's vocabularies, and that's just a very common experience for people who've been sexually abused, whether they've just had a year of therapy or 25 years like myself.
Do you know maybe like the stats around this?
Yeah, conservatively, it's one in three girls and one in six boys. And that's a conservative estimate. And so that there's a website called, I think it's called One in Six, which is a website specifically for boys and men who've been victims of sexual abuse because their stories are different than because there's a lot of women and non-binary folks who feel really comfortable sharing their stories, but there's a lot more stigma and shame, especially with men, because if it's male on male, it's like, ooh, that is not something that we're, as a society that we're conditioned to talk about. Um, so yeah, they're very alarming. It is an epidemic. It is a silent epidemic that you know is really affecting our culture. And I we were talking earlier at the beginning about how there needs to be a reckoning, and we need to have a reckoning around this topic. And because the a lot of the illnesses that women, especially in this country, autoimmune diseases, Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue syndrome, a lot of those people that have those autoimmune diseases have been victims of sexual abuse. And if you think about people who have been so severely disabled that they can no longer work, if you look at that statistic, you know, we have people who are not able to like be members in society, like paying into our tax system, so it's like the revenue that is lost from people. And this is not, I'm trying to say this in a way that's like not victim blaming, but lost work time, lost wages, like this is a really big thing that no one talks about. And the other thing that is not talked about very much is like the out-of-pocket costs for survivors who um, pay for therapy, pay for um, body work, just all kinds of um, medical things that happen because of, being a victim of incest or child sexual abuse. It's conservatively estimated that a survivor has to pay out like $125,000 over their lifetime. That is conservative. I personally paid out at least 50,000 in my own therapy. And there was a, there was a fund that was set up here in Oregon. It's a crime victims fund. And I was eligible for, some assistance from that, but it was not very much money. And,
Mm.
I'm grateful that I live in a state that has that, but there's just, it's just such a shame that, this topic is not talked about. And I think it's because we live in such a patriarchal society that wants this topic to go away. It's not comfortable. And I think yeah, it's just such a shame.
I know you've done some projects. You've done a podcast. You're also working on a memoir. Uh, can you walk us through what was it like doing the podcast? And what's the name of the podcast?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so the podcast I did is we ran for one season. It's called Recognize Our Power. And I sought out to interview women who had been victims of child sexual abuse and sexual assault. And they were women who are writers who've written books, or are in the process of writing books. So um, one of the people that I got to interview was a co-author of The Courage to Heal. I'm totally blanking on her name right now. I got to talk to Rowena Chu, who was Harvey Weinstein's administrative assistant. She was featured in um, the New York Times, and many documentaries. She's at work on a memoir. And, there's a woman named Josephine Lauren who runs Incest Aware. She's based in New York, and she's also at work on a memoir. So, getting to talk to women about and non-binary folks about the craft of writing, and what it's like to be a survivor of sexual assault, was very um, interesting in that, when you're writing from a craft perspective, you almost have to kind of step out of the story and be like a third party observer. So that was interesting to talk to people about that perspective because, um, a lot of people write from like a therapeutic standpoint. They'll keep journals, which is great. And it just is so important in our healing process. But when you're writing at a craft level, it's kind of like a whole other um, ball of wax. So really getting to talk to those folks was so important and great. I'm glad that I have an archive of it on the Recognize Our Power website, and people can go there and listen to those interviews. Or there's 10 episodes. And then Incest Aware has a website. I believe it's incestaware.org. I'm actually going to be heading up to Seattle on this coming Saturday to speak at a school that's putting on it's called the Students Organized Consent Conference. So it's a student-run conference at a private school there, and they've invited 7 or 8 schools from the Seattle area. People can come and attend, and I'm going to be on a survivor panel with many people from Incest Aware. And so it's always great to just be able to connect with other survivors out there who have that shared experience, that shared language.
Now, for this part of the podcast, I would like to ask you the question that I ask all of my guests, and that is, Kelly, what is your truth that heals?
Oh, wow, what a great question. You know, for me, my truth that heals is just being able to be my authentic self and sharing my story across, this platform. I have a public facing Instagram, Kelly the Writer, and just being able to be my real authentic self, because that's how I've shown up in life, is just being really authentic and real. And I think we really need people to show up and be real, especially around the topic of incest in our society.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And before we go, are there any links or handles that you would like to share with the audience?
Yes, sure. So people can go and listen to the Recognize Our Power podcast. It's live at recognizeourpower.com. And there's also an Instagram, not super active, but it's Recognize Our Power. My personal Instagram, where people can go and watch videos that I record, is Kelly the Writer. I also have a Facebook page, that's Kelly the Writer One. People can go and watch my videos there as well. And I also have a YouTube. Um, just search Kelly Wallace, it should pop up. And My personal website is kellywallace.org, where you can read some of my writing and also um, listen to some of my podcasts that I've done over the years.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for being a guest here on the Truth to Heals podcast. And for those in the audience, if you didn't catch all of the links, don't worry. I'll be leaving it in the show notes, so you can also go there, and to also have awareness on this issue. So again, Kelly E. Wallace, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
You are welcome.